Part 1, The Line You Don't Cross. Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Darkness. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true disturbing encounters with black-eyed kids in the Appalachian Mountains. Children who seems like human until you realize something is very, very wrong. We can't come in unless you invite us. Tonight on Mr. Darkness, Jake Bishop was only 11 years old this summer. He saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It happened in the Appalachian wilds, under a sky thick with the kind of silence that presses against your ears like cotton soaked in water. He never talked about it, not even as an adult, not even when the nightmares came. He buried it deep, just like the memory of the children with no eyes. That summer, Jake's parents sent him to stay with his grandmother, Mabel, who lived off a mountain road in a weather-beaten log cabin just south of Brasstown, Bald, Georgia. His cousin Tommy, 2 years older and twice as reckless, came along for the ride. It was supposed to be a break from the city, a 2-week detox of fresh air, boiled peanuts, and barefoot hikes. What they got instead was a lesson in fear. You have to understand something about that place. It didn't feel like the world most people live in. The air was thicker, slower. Even sound didn't travel the same way in those woods. The locals didn't talk about the forest, not really. And when they did, they used half sentences and unfinished words, like they were afraid to wake something up just by naming it. There were no neighbors, no lights, no mailboxes. Just one long gravel drive that twisted through pine and ash trees like a forgotten artery. On the second night, it began. It was a small thing, almost laughable. They heard a tapping, just 3 soft knocks on the cabin's back wall, near the kitchen window. When they looked, no one was there. They checked the yard, the shed, even the old smokehouse where Granddad used to cure meat before he passed. Nothing. But the woods felt aware. The next morning, Grandma Mabel made pancakes but wouldn't look them in the eye. Her hands trembled as she cooked, a hairline crack in her left thumbnail catching the sunlight like a razor. She said one thing, "Don't go past the split oak." Tommy asked why. She just shook her head. "You want to keep your bones quiet at night? You'll listen. That's all." Later, Jake asked what that meant. Keep your bones quiet. But Tommy just laughed and mimicked her voice like it was all some senile backwoods superstition. But Jake didn't laugh. Not then, not ever. The split oak stood about a quarter-mile past the last stretch of trail behind the cabin, a twisted corpse of a tree with one half rotted out and the other still clawing toward the sky. You had to cross a shallow creek to get to it, and beyond that, the trail thinned into almost nothing, just a tunnel of thorns and green shadows. On the 5th day, Tommy got bored. "You ever notice how old people make up rules for the stuff they can't explain?" he said, tossing a rock into the fire pit. "You think Mabel even knows what's out there? Or is she just afraid of shadows?" Jake didn't answer. "I'm going," Tommy said. "You can come if you want." It was the kind of dare that came without a smirk. No challenge in his voice, just certainty. Jake followed. The creek was barely ankle deep, its stones mossy and cold. As they stepped into the woods beyond the split oak, everything changed. The air felt thicker, denser, like the trees had swallowed the sky. There were no bugs, no wind, not even the creak of branches or the rustle of underbrush. Just silence. And then, a hum. It wasn't music. It wasn't mechanical. It was something older, like a forgotten note echoing through the bones of the earth. Jake stopped walking. "You hear that?" he asked. Tommy turned his head, frowning. "No!" But Jake did. It made his teeth itch. They found the clearing 5 minutes later. It wasn't marked on any map, and it didn't look like it had been touched by boots or blades in decades. The center was smooth earth, almost too smooth, like something had wiped it clean. And in the middle stood 2 children, a boy and a girl, both barefoot, both pale. Their clothes looked like they'd been pulled from a different century. The boy wore tan knickers and a collared shirt with buttons that caught the light like glass. The girl wore a blue dress with a ribbon tied too tightly around her braid. They didn't look up. They didn't blink. Jake's throat dried instantly. Something in his brain began to scream, a voice not his own. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Tommy raised a hand, trying to wave. "Hey, y'all lost?" The children moved at the same time, snapping their heads up with a speed that made Jake take a step back. The girl tilted her head too far, like a marionette whose strings had been tugged wrong. "We're lost," she said. The boy echoed her, one beat too late. "We can't find our home." There was something wrong with their voices. Too flat, not robotic exactly. More like someone had taught them words but not how to use them. Tommy stepped forward. "Where'd you come from?" The boy said, "We came from below." That's when Jake saw their eyes. Not just dark, not shadowed. Black. Black from lid to lid. No whites, no pupils. Just smooth obsidian voids that looked wet but caught no reflection. Jake couldn't breathe. Tommy stood frozen beside him, and for the first time Jake saw fear crack through his cousin's face like a spiderweb of glass. He reached for Jake's wrist, gripped it hard. The boy stepped closer. "Take us with you," he said. His voice had changed. It dropped an octave. It didn't sound like a child anymore. It sounded like something wearing a child's voice like skin, like someone dragging their words through mud. The girl took a step too. "We need to come inside." That's when Jake ran. He didn't speak, didn't think, just ran. Branches tore at his arms. The silence behind him didn't chase, but it didn't stay still either. It felt like the forest leaned in, trying to listen to the sound of their fear. They didn't stop until the cabin came into view. Grandma Mabel was already on the porch. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. "Inside," she said. No questions. She locked the door behind them and went to the back shelf. Jake had never seen what was in that corner before. A tin box with rusted latches. Inside were bent iron nails, rock salt, bundles of sage tied with red twine, and a jar of thick black liquid that didn't move even when she shook it. She began placing things in the corners, nails under the floorboards, salt on the windowsills. Her lips moved constantly, whispering something that didn't sound like English. At dusk, she hammered a horseshoe over every doorframe. Jake watched, trembling. "Why?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes hard. "You crossed the line. That's why they saw you." That night the tapping came. Not at the windows, not at the door, on the walls, places where no one could stand, always in pairs. Tap, tap, pause. Then again. Tommy slept with a knife in his hand. They didn't speak, didn't sleep. The next morning Mabel wrapped every mirror in the house with cloth. "Mirrors give them courage," she said. "If they come again, it'll be through the glass." On the third night, the voices returned, soft, polite. "We're cold. We're hungry. Let us in." Over and over. Mabel sat in her old rocking chair, shotgun across her lap, staring at the front door like she was daring it to move. At dawn, she stood and said, "It's time." She packed their bags, told their parents they'd gotten sick from bad water and had to be sent home. She stayed behind, said she had something left to do. Jake never saw her again. A week later, they found the cabin burned to the ground, but the trees around it were untouched. In the middle of the ash was the black jar, still sealed. No one ever explained how it survived. No one found remains. Jake didn't talk about what happened. Not to his parents, not to his teachers, not even to Tommy. Years passed. The dreams came anyway. The tapping on the walls, the voices behind the mirrors. We're still waiting, and always the eyes, glossy, endless, watching. If you're still listening, consider subscribing to this channel. Stories like this aren't just fiction. They're warnings, and your support helps us keep telling them before it's too late. Like this video, share it with someone who knows the mountains don't forget, and comment below if you've ever heard something knock when no one was there. Part 2. The Vanishing Road. Eric Granger wasn't the kind of man who scared easy. He worked in telecom maintenance for nearly a decade. Storms, backwoods tower collapses, you name it. He'd been chased by dogs, caught between wildfires, and once had to hike 6 miles back to civilization after a Jeep broke an axle in a dried creek bed. But nothing ever made his chest seize like the feeling he got that Thursday afternoon on Route 19, somewhere between Brasstown Bald and the edge of Monongahela National Forest. His day started simple enough. The service report from the regional tower system flagged one of the emergency relays as unresponsive. It wasn't even a critical node, barely used except during bad weather and backwoods search operations. But the report had a handwritten note attached: check for physical damage. Avoid after sundown. Eric assumed it was some local text version of a joke. He tossed the paper on the passenger seat and punched the coordinates into his GPS. 3 hours winding roads and 2 energy drinks later, he was deep into backcountry Georgia, with no cell service and his dashboard map blinking uselessly. The road narrowed the deeper he drove. Pavement cracked, reflectors disappeared. Trees leaned overhead like whispering giants. And then suddenly, there was nothing but white mist. It came out of nowhere. No weather alerts, no drop in temperature, just an ocean of low, swirling fog that swallowed the road and pressed against the windshield like wet wool. Eric slowed to a crawl. He should have turned around. Instead, he kept driving. His Jeep crept forward, tires crunching gravel he couldn't see. The GPS was dead now, just a gray void with a blinking blue dot that jittered uselessly. He reached for the radio. Static. Then something odd. A click. Faint. Almost like tap. He froze. The sound wasn't from the radio. It was from outside, behind him. He looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just mist. He shifted into park and leaned forward, wiping condensation from the inside of the glass with the sleeve of his jacket. Still nothing. He killed the engine. Silence fell like a guillotine. Even the bugs had stopped. Just fog and stillness, broken only by the soft metallic ping of the cooling engine. Then came the light. A soft yellow glow off to the right, dim and flickering, half hidden behind a cluster of trees. It looked like an old gas station, one of those squat, concrete things with a sagging canopy and a single row of pumps. Eric frowned. He hadn't seen any turns. No signs, no driveways. But the light was real. He saw it flicker, and his fuel gauge was brushing E. He turned the ignition. The engine stuttered before catching. The Jeep rolled slowly toward the light. As he pulled in, the tires crunched over dry gravel. The sound felt impossibly loud in the dead air. The place looked deserted, like it hadn't been touched in years. The paint was peeling, the windows fogged over. An old Coke machine stood under the awning, rusted to hell, and the price display read $0.40. Eric got out. The cold hit him immediately, an unnatural kind of cold, thick and wet. He zipped his jacket and walked to the door. A small bell jingled as he pushed it open. Inside smelled like wet cardboard and mold. No music, no humming coolers, just silence. A few shelves still held ancient cans, beans, condensed milk, sardines with faded labels. The register was open and empty. A flickering bulb buzzed overhead, barely lighting the cracked floor tiles. Eric stepped to the counter. "Hello?" No answer. He tried again, louder. "Anyone here?" Still nothing. He walked around the counter, checking for a bell or buzzer. His boots echoed with every step. That's when he saw the security monitor, an old black and white CRT built into the wall behind the register. It was live, and it was showing someone standing at the edge of the canopy. Eric turned, heart thudding. The parking lot was empty, but when he looked back, the monitor still showed the figure, a small one, barefoot, wearing a white shirt and dark pants. The image distorted slightly. Snow rippled across the screen. Then another figure joined the first, a girl, in a dress that looked too clean, too pressed. Eric walked to the window. The glass was too fogged to see clearly, so he rubbed a circle clear with the heel of his hand. They were there, a boy and a girl, standing 10 feet from the door, shoulder to shoulder, staring at him. He couldn't see their faces, just silhouettes in the mist. Then the boy raised his hand and waved. Eric's skin went cold, not from fear, from instinct, the way a deer bolts before thunder cracks. He backed away from the window. They moved forward, slow, synchronized. The girl raised a hand, knocking softly. Tap, tap, tap. Eric stayed frozen. Then the boy spoke, and though the door muffled it, the words reached him clearly. "Can we come in?" The voice didn't match the shape. It sounded old, dry, like someone whispering through cracked wood. The girl spoke next. "It's cold. We're lost." Eric shook his head. "Not happening." They didn't respond. They didn't move. He walked back behind the counter and pulled out his phone. 3 bars. He didn't question it. He hit the call button and dialed HQ. It rang once. Then static. A deep voice crackled through. "You almost let them in." Eric dropped the phone. When he picked it up, it was dead again. Just a blinking battery icon. He turned back to the window. They were gone. But the door, the lock was undone. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't even touch it. The handle turned. He lunged forward and slammed it shut just before it creaked open, throwing the bolt. His breath came in short gasps now, fogging the glass. He backed away. Then he saw it. Handprints, small ones, on the inside of the glass. He didn't remember leaving. He didn't remember the drive. But somehow, an hour later, he was on a paved road, radio working, cell service full, no fog, no station in the rear view. He drove straight to the regional dispatch office in Asheville and filed his report. He left out the gas station, left out the kids, just said he couldn't find the tower. Road was blocked. His supervisor gave him a week off, said he looked pale. Eric didn't argue. That night at home, he unpacked his gear. In his backpack, buried between the tool set and a roll of wiring, was something he didn't remember putting there. A small, neatly folded dress sock, child-sized, stiff with dried mud, black. When the dreams started 2 days later, he'd wake up drenched in sweat, sure that someone was knocking, not on the door but on the wall behind his headboard. Always 3 knocks, then silence, then a whisper. "You almost let us in." He moved to a hotel. Didn't matter. The tapping followed. So did the handprints, sometimes in steam on the mirror. Once on the window of his car after a rainstorm. The worst was in the elevator. He was headed to the 6th floor, alone. The lights flickered between floors 3 and 4. And then, the voice from the corner, soft, deliberate. "You see us now. That's enough." 1 month later, he returned to the forest. Not because he wanted to, but because something in him said it wouldn't end until he did. He spent 2 days tracking every road near the coordinates. Nothing. No station. No clearing. Just trees. And then he found it. Not the station, but a foundation. Cinder blocks sunk into moss. Half-buried pump nozzles. An outline in the dirt where a structure had once stood. He walked the perimeter. There were prints. Small, barefoot, but deep. Too deep for a child's weight. He didn't wait. Didn't touch anything. Just left and never went back. Eric lives in Charleston now. New job, new place, new locks. But he still checks the mirrors twice a night. Still sleeps with the lights on. Still wakes up to that same whisper. Still hears that tap, tap, tap. And sometimes when the wind turns wrong and the world feels sideways, he sees them, in reflections, in shadows, at the edge of headlights, not chasing, just watching, waiting, because the rules haven't changed. They can't come in unless you say yes, and once you see them, that's enough. Part 3, Mirrors Hold Memory. Lena Miller hadn't planned to end up in Harlan, Kentucky. In fact, just 3 months earlier, she would have sworn under oath that she'd never set foot in another Appalachian town again. But when you're running from a man who swore he'd rather see you dead than free, and when the courts do nothing but file the paperwork, you go where the map runs out. And Harlan was exactly that, a ghost of a coal town, tucked between hard hills and hollower promises. It was where the roads went from paved to gravel to mud, and then into forest so thick it swallowed sound. The kind of place you only found if you were trying very hard, or trying very hard to disappear. She came with nothing but a duffel bag, her 8-year-old daughter Mara, and a rusted-out Buick that wheezed like it had asthma. The house she rented was a weathered 2-bedroom with leaning shutters and a tin roof that rattled when the wind blew too hard. It backed up against the woods. No neighbors. No cell service. No questions. Perfect. For a while. The first week was almost normal. Lena scrubbed every floorboard with bleach. She fixed the hinge on the screen door and lined the kitchen drawers with paper. Mara unpacked her tiny box of toys and found a stray cat in the shed. They named it Beans. And for a moment, for the first time in years, Lena breathed. But peace doesn't last in places where the air remembers things. And the house on the edge of Harlan? It remembered. It began with mirrors, small things, a smudge that wouldn't wipe away, a faint outline on the hallway glass, too low to be hers. Then came the breath marks. At night, condensation would cloud the mirror in the bathroom, even though they hadn't used hot water. And always in the center, two small circles, like eyes. Then Mara started talking to someone. Lena found her one afternoon sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, holding one of her stuffed animals and speaking in whispers. When Lena asked who she was talking to, Mara smiled and said, "They said their names aren't important. They're just waiting." Lena froze. "Who's waiting, baby?" "The cold kids." Lena knelt down. "What kids?" Mara shrugged. "The ones that knock. They said they're not allowed in unless I say they can." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, eyes open, listening to every creak and pop of the old house. At 2:13 a.m., she heard it. Tap, tap, not on the door. On the wall, right beside the headboard. She sat up. Mara was asleep in the other room. Beans, the cat, was curled on her blanket. Lena crept into the hallway. The bathroom light flickered, then steadied. She stepped in slowly. The mirror was fogged over, but she hadn't showered. She lifted a trembling hand and wiped a circle clear. Behind her reflection, standing just outside the bathroom door, were two shapes, small, still, child-sized. She spun around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. She ran back into Mara's room, heart pounding, and locked the door. The next morning, the mirror was shattered. From the inside, Beans was missing. Lena drove straight to the local hardware store. She bought salt, 3 pounds of it, a box of iron nails, and an old carpenter's hammer with a split handle. The cashier, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and a cigarette burned into the corner of her lip, raised an eyebrow. "Storm coming?" she asked. Lena hesitated. "No," she said. "Just mice." The woman nodded slowly, like she knew exactly what kind of mice lived out near the forest. "You wrap your mirrors yet?" Lena blinked. "Excuse me. Wrap 'em in black cloth. Don't matter what kind. Just not white. White shows reflection. Black swallows it." Lena opened her mouth to ask more, but the woman was already ringing her up. That night, Lena did as she was told. She wrapped every mirror, even the one in the hallway that was bolted to the wall. She covered the reflective glass on the oven, the toaster, the microwave door. She poured salt along the windowsills and nailed one rusted horseshoe above each entrance. She didn't know why. She only knew that fear made you humble. She kept Mara close. But fear isn't a wall. It's a window, and something was already looking through. 3 days later, Lena woke to the sound of Mara talking again. This time it wasn't playful. She sounded resigned. Lena crept to the bedroom door and listened. "No, I said no," Mara whispered. Pause. "No, I told you already. Mama said I can't." Pause. "They said you're not allowed. That's why you need me." Longer pause. "I'm not scared of you." Lena opened the door. Mara was sitting by the window, the curtains drawn. "Who are you talking to?" Lena asked. Mara didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slowly and said, "They're mad now." Lena crossed the room and yanked the curtains open. Outside, just beyond the window, 2 children stood in the overgrown grass. A boy, a girl. The girl wore a dress that was too clean. The boy had suspenders and bare feet. Their eyes were pure black, glossy, like wet obsidian. And they were smiling. Lena screamed. She slammed the curtains shut and backed away, pulling Mara with her. The doorknob began to rattle. Not the front door, not the back. The closet. Tap, tap, tap. Mara whispered. They know about the mirrors. Lena drove them into town. They didn't pack. They didn't stop. She didn't know where she was going, only that it had to be away. She parked behind the church on Main Street and sat in the lot until sunrise. When the priest opened the side door for morning prayers, she walked straight up to him. Do you believe in things that aren't dead but were never alive? She asked. He paused, looked her in the eye and said, You saw them, didn't you? He let them in, not into the church, but into the rectory basement. An old place, cool stone walls, dust and scripture. She and Mara stayed there for 3 nights. Each night the lights flickered at the same hour, 2:13 a.m. Each night they heard the tapping, on the walls. On the mirror in the hallway, which the priest had forgotten to cover, the priest gave them Appalachian charm work to hang, salt and iron braided into wool rope, anointed with oil, and a scripture verse written in ink made from burnt sage. Still the children came. The priest saw them once. He'd gone outside to light the incense for evening prayers and found them sitting on the rectory steps, smiling, waiting. He didn't light the incense. He poured a ring of holy water instead. They didn't cross it. They just stood and whispered. We only need one word. On the 4th day, Mara disappeared. 1 minute she was in the corner reading a book. The next, gone. The back door was cracked open. Lena ran through the church like a wild animal, screaming her name, running through the pews, the graveyard, the woods behind the cemetery. It took 27 minutes to find her. She was standing in the clearing behind the chapel, face pale, dress soaked from the waist down. The children were nowhere to be seen. When Lena dropped to her knees and grabbed her, Mara whispered, They asked again. I said no, but they promised to come back. Lena wept, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was rage. When that night, she didn't sleep. She read every page of the old charm book the priest gave her. She boiled moon water, collected 3 nights earlier, and mixed it with lavender and salt. She burned the priest's sage until it filled every inch of the rectory basement with a thick, bitter smoke. And then she sat by the mirror, alone. She uncovered it, faced it, and waited. At 2:13 a.m., they appeared. Not in the reflection, but in the room, behind her. She felt the air change, felt their presence like weight behind her ribs. You don't belong here, she said, voice steady. You never did. The boy stepped forward. We only need a yes. The girl leaned her head, owl-like. You love your daughter, she said. You'd give anything to keep her safe. Lena stood. Even my soul. The girl's smile cracked too wide. That'll do. But Lena didn't flinch. She lifted the jar. Moon water, salt, ash, and broke it against the floor. The mist hissed like boiling blood. The children screamed, not loud but low, like wind moaning through a grave. And then, silence. They never came back. Not in the mirrors, not in the walls, not in the dreams. But Lena never stopped watching. She never left Harlan. She stayed, built a new life. Opened a shelter for women running from the things that wore human faces. Sometimes she still heard whispers in the woods. But the children, they moved on, because she didn't say yes, and because her love, for once, was stronger than their need to be let in. Part 4. The hunters become the haunted. There are stories you tell because you want to be believed. And then there are stories you tell because deep down, part of you hopes no one ever believes them. Because if they do, then it means the nightmare is real. That was exactly what Nate Carr thought when he pressed record on the first camera and looked straight into the lens. All right, he said, brushing the mountain dust from his jacket. This is Nate from Underneath the Static, and we're here in Boone, North Carolina, chasing what might be the most persistent urban legend in the southern Appalachians. Black-eyed children. You've heard the stories. You've seen the creepypasta. But we're here to get real answers. The camera panned back to show the rest of the crew. Jess, his co-host and gear expert, with a tight braid and even tighter skepticism. Mike, their sound guy and reluctant driver. chewing gum like it was a tranquilizer. And Amber, newest to the team, a folklore researcher who had grown up not far from Harlan. If she'd known what was coming, she might never have gotten in the van. The four of them were staying 3 nights in an abandoned ranger outpost on the edge of the Appalachian Trail, 10 miles outside of Boone. The locals refused to go near it, said there were disappearances, voices in the trees, lights no one could trace. But what caught Amber's attention was a transcript she found in an old university archive, a field report from a 1967 state trooper who claimed he found a childlike entity in the woods that refused to show its eyes. He never filed another report again. This was exactly the kind of thing Nate lived for. He was charismatic, sharp, and a firm believer in technology over superstition. With 230,000 subscribers hanging on to every episode, he'd built underneath the static from nothing more than a Reddit thread and a Sony camcorder. But Boone was going to change all that. Boone was going to break him. When they arrived late in the afternoon, the outpost sat half sunken into the ridge, half cabin and half bunker, like someone tried to hide it in the mountain and gave up halfway through. Amber noticed the markings first, charcoal scrawled symbols around the frame of the door. Salt lines on the windowsills now broken. Jess said, "Someone's been watching too many Blair Witch reruns." Amber didn't laugh. Inside it was dry, cold, and filled with the dusty silence of something that hadn't breathed in years. Mike set up the audio gear. Jess rigged night vision cameras at the perimeter. Nate walked room to room, narrating. Amber explored. There were books left behind, handwritten journals, sketchbooks with images of trees that bled, eyes with no whites, and children drawn without faces. One phrase kept repeating across the pages, over and over in shaking black ink. Don't let them speak. Don't listen. Don't invite. She brought the journal into the main room. Guys, this isn't just folklore. This is ritual documentation. Look at this. This symbol is apotropaic, warding. And these notes, someone was actively trying to contain something here. Nate raised an eyebrow. Contain what? Creepy kids? Amber didn't answer. She was staring at one page in particular. It had no words, just a charcoal drawing of two children holding hands. Both were barefoot, eyes solid black, standing beneath the words, "We speak when the wind turns backward." The first night passed quietly, too quietly. No wind, no owls, not even the hum of crickets. But the mics caught something. Mike listened to the playback the next morning. At 3:11 a.m., there was a soft, rhythmic tapping on mic 4, placed outside near the tree line. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Then beneath the static, a voice, a child's voice. "We're cold." By the second night, they set a trap. Nate and Jess stayed inside monitoring screens, while Mike and Amber took shifts outside with thermal cams. At 2:54 a.m., the temperature dropped 11 degrees in less than 5 minutes. The motion sensors went off at all 4 corners, simultaneously. And then, the lights failed, not all at once, one at a time. First the perimeter, then the hallway, then the main room. Amber lit her flashlight. The beam cut through dust like fog. She whispered, "Jess, Nate, where are you?" The reply came from beside her. Not Nate, not Jess. "We're here." She turned. 2 children stood in the corner of the room, arms at their sides staring through her. Black eyes, blank faces, perfect stillness. Jess screamed. The children vanished. The equipment surged back on. Nate vomited in the sink. The recording gear, all corrupted. They tried to leave that morning, loaded the van, turned the key, dead. Mike checked the battery. "Nothing wrong with it," he said. "It's like the charge just left." Amber pointed to the woods. "They don't want us to leave." That night, the children came inside. They didn't knock, didn't speak. They appeared. First at the windows, then in the mirrors, then reflected in the glass of the screens. even though the screens were off. Jess was the first to snap. She grabbed her gear bag and bolted out the back door, yelling that she wasn't going to be some sacrificial lamb in a found-footage horror story. They found her an hour later, standing in the creek, staring straight up. Her eyes were bleeding, not from trauma, from pressure, like something inside her had tried to push its way out. She whispered, "They showed me what they want. They want stories, our mouths, our voices. If we speak them, they live longer." She passed out. They carried her inside and tried to call for help. No signal, not even static, just silence. At dawn, Nate found a flash drive tucked inside the old Ranger desk. It wasn't dusty, wasn't aged. Plugged it into the only working laptop. One file, a recording. It was labeled, "They Heard You." He pressed play. The screen filled with corrupted footage, flashes of trees, a child's face, teeth too sharp for its mouth, hands scraping glass. Then a voice, his voice. "We invite them when we speak their name." Then black, then static. Then, "You see them now. That's enough." They tried again to leave. No luck. Jess, now mostly catatonic, wouldn't stop rocking and humming a nursery rhyme no one recognized. Mike suggested they hike out. Amber refused. "If we leave the circle," she said, "they follow." So they stayed one more night. The final night. Nate didn't record. He sat in silence, staring at the broken screens. At 3 a.m., the children came. All four of them saw them, standing shoulder to shoulder in the center of the room, closer than ever, realer than ever. Nate asked, "What do you want?" The girl stepped forward. "Your voice." He asked again, "Why?" The boy smiled. "Because once it's spoken, we never leave." Then they vanished. Not into smoke, not into light. They peeled backward, like something reversing a recording, like a scream and rewind, and then they were gone. In the morning, the van started. They didn't speak on the drive, didn't upload the episode. Nate deleted every backup. Amber quit the podcast. Mike moved to Utah. Jess entered a treatment facility. Only one thing remained, a flash drive in Nate's pocket, unlabeled. He found it weeks later, plugged it in. The file was blank until he pressed play. Then, "We still hear you." And in the black screen, two reflections, children, watching, waiting, smiling. Part 5, The Last Invitation. The road to Abingdon was slick with October rain in memory. Raymond Bishop hadn't seen the old house in over 40 years, not since the night his sister disappeared, not since his family packed what little they could carry and fled the Appalachian Hollow without a word to anyone. He told himself for decades that it was just trauma, just grief, just the way children twist pain into monsters. But now at 67, with no wife, no kids, and a terminal diagnosis, Raymond had nothing left to fear. The past had finally called him home, and it was waiting. So he came alone. No family, no friends, just an old Ford truck, a shoebox containing his sister's ashes, and a journal he hadn't opened since 1981. The house was still there, collapsed in on itself, but recognizable. Moss had devoured the siding, ivy choked the porch posts, the roof had caved in, and the front door sagged on one hinge like a broken jaw. Raymond parked under the trees and turned off the engine. For a long time he just sat there, listening. Nothing moved. Not the trees, not the wind, not the world. He stepped out. The gravel crunched under his boots like bones under pressure. He walked to the porch and stopped at the threshold. He remembered his father's voice. "You never step back into a haunted place without leaving something behind. Otherwise, you take it with you." So he reached into his coat and pulled out the jar. Moon water, salt, ground sage. He poured a circle around the remains of the front steps and stepped over. Inside, the air was thick. Not with dust, but with silence. The kind that pulsed, that breathed. His flashlight caught the edges of old furniture, collapsed walls, and shattered glass. And then, the mirror. The only thing still intact, hanging on the hallway wall, clean, untouched, as if time had feared it. He stepped closer, looked into it, and saw her, Janie, his sister, age 12, still wearing the red overalls she vanished in. She didn't smile. She didn't speak, but her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were black. Raymond stumbled back. His flashlight hit the floor with a crack, plunging the hallway into darkness. And then, like a switch, the house lit with faint blue moonlight, except it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the mirror, and from within it, figures began to emerge. Children. Dozens of them, not crawling out, not stepping forward, but appearing, one layer at a time, like a photograph developing in reverse. Raymond backed into the old kitchen. He reached into his pack and pulled out the journal. It was his own, the one he'd started keeping after Janie disappeared. Back then, his parents told him to forget, that she ran away, that grief plays tricks. But the journal remembered everything. The night she let them in, the knocking that started months before, the dreams of children outside her window, the night she stood at the mirror and whispered, yes. He'd blocked it all, until now. Toward the air shifted. From the mirror, a voice echoed, soft, familiar. You left me. Raymond turned. The girl in the red overalls stood in the kitchen doorway. But it wasn't Janie. Not really. It was the shape of her, the memory of her, worn like a mask. You didn't stop them. Raymond stepped back. I was a child, he whispered. So were we. She blinked slowly. Her eyes stayed black. But they took us anyway. The other children began to filter in, one by one, each with that same glassy stare. Some dressed in modern clothes, some in old-time rags, a few barefoot, all silent, all waiting. Raymond looked at the journal in his hand, and then at the old iron stove in the corner. He flipped to the last page. The ritual. He didn't remember writing it, but there it was, in his own handwriting. To break what was let in, speak their names, give what was taken, and burn what remains. He knelt on the kitchen floor, opened the box of ashes. His hands shook. Janie, he said, I'm sorry. The girl's head twitched, not in pain, in reaction, recognition. The others took one step forward. Raymond poured the ashes into the iron stove. He added the journal, and then the match. Flames hissed upward, green-blue with no smoke. The air snapped like breaking ice. The mirror in the hallway shattered, without sound. The children screamed, but not with mouths, with memory. Raymond fell to his knees, ears ringing. Light filled the house. Not moonlight, not flame. Something older, purging, and then silence, again. But this time, the air felt empty, clean, free. Raymond opened his eyes. The children were gone. So was Janie. Only the journal remained, singed, but one page left unburned. It read, not all doors open with keys. Some open with guilt, and others with grief. He stepped outside into the dawn light. Birdsong returned. The wind breathed. The mountain, for the first time in decades, felt alive. Raymond lit a cigarette and sat on the porch steps. He knew he didn't have much time left, but what time he had, he'd spent making sure no one else invited them in. 1 year later, a boy walked past the ruins of the old house near Abingdon, Virginia. His parents were arguing up the trail, distracted. He wandered, bored, dragging a stick through the gravel. And then he saw it, a shape, in the trees. 2 children, a boy and a girl, smiling, still, waiting. He took one step forward. They didn't move. The girl tilted her head. We're lost, she said. Can you help us? The boy blinked. We need to come in. The child paused, remembered what his grandpa told him. If someone ever asks to come in and it feels wrong, you run. So he did. And as he ran, he swore he heard the girl whisper, not yet.